They've lied to you about everything. Every single thing you think you know about Australia's history is a fairy tale, a rigged story, written by the same parasites who control the world today. They told you about convicts, dirty, poor criminals dragged from England in chains, dumped here on the edge of the world to work off their sins. But that's not the truth. That's not even close to the truth. That's a cover story, a smokescreen, a poison injected into our history so we would never know who we really are. Those so-called convicts weren't criminals. They weren't thieves. They weren't murderers. And they weren't lowlifes. They were the last remnants of a great civilization. The Tartarians. They were builders, craftsmen, healers, and inventors. They were the ones who knew the old technologies, the ones who understood free energy, natural law, and how to live in harmony with the land. They built the grand architecture that still stands hidden in plain sight across our towns and cities. Buildings you've been told were made by colonial settlers with hand tools in the 1800s, even though you know deep down that's impossible. These structures weren't made by sweating convicts with shovels and hammers. They were made by the old world, the Tartarian world, a world wiped from the record books by force. And it wasn't just the Tartarians here. Long before the so-called colonizers arrived, the blackfellas, the original custodians of this land, lived in balance with the Tartarian settlers. They weren't enemies. They weren't at war. They traded, they shared knowledge, they respected each other's ways. Together they formed a culture unlike anything the rest of the world had. A society rooted in truth, connection, and freedom. But then came the Freemason empire builders, the British Crown, the parasites of the old world order. They sailed here, not to settle the land, but to erase it. They looked at the blackfellas and the Tartarians, and they saw a threat. People who could not be ruled, people who did not bow to kings or bankers, people who could not be taxed, fined, or enslaved because they already understood real freedom. That's when the plan was set in motion, and they knew they couldn't simply say, "We invaded and destroyed a great civilization." That would make them the villains outright. So they invented a story, they rewrote our beginning, they created the myth of the convict colony, a tale of bad men and women banished from England, brought here in chains, working off their punishment. They took the Tartarians, free people, builders, inventors, and branded them criminals. And in doing so, they not only tore apart their lives, but planted a lie so deep that generations would believe their own ancestors were scum. You see how it works? They didn't just destroy the Tartarians physically. They destroyed their legacy. They made sure that the children of those people and their children's children would grow up ashamed of where they came from. They would believe they came from thieves and beggars, not from master builders and free men. It's psychological warfare. And the blackfellas, they didn't escape the same plan. The colonizers painted them as savages, uncivilized, primitive. They stripped their land, stole their children, and tried to break their songlines, the spiritual connections that bound them to this place. They pitted blackfellas against the descendants of the so-called convicts so that neither side would realize they'd once been allies. The Freemason world builders weren't here to make Australia prosper. They were here to remove the last bastion of a world they couldn't control. They tore down Tartarian technology, covered up free energy systems, dismantled advanced infrastructure, and replaced it with their own primitive, money-driven systems. They made sure every man and woman here would need to work for them, pay taxes to them, and live under their laws. And they made sure that both Tartarian descendants and Aboriginal Australians were too busy surviving or too busy hating each other to ever rise up against the real enemy. And look around today, the plan worked. Most Australians still parrot the convict story like it's gospel. They still celebrate Australia Day, a holiday marking the beginning of this massive lie. They still think the grand old buildings in our cities were built by pickaxe-wielding prisoners in the 1800s. They still believe their ancestors were nothing more than pawns in the British Empire's game. And the education system keeps it that way. Teachers repeat the same rubbish from the same history books written by the victors. They don't question it, they don't investigate, they just keep passing the lie down the line. But you can't hide the truth forever. Look at the architecture. Look at the symmetry, the detail, the stonework. Look at the impossibly large arches, the domes, the towers. These aren't colonial farmhouses. They're the remnants of a world that was here long before the first fleet. And when you learn to see it, you can't unsee it. The convicts weren't criminals. They were prisoners of war in a war they didn't even know they were fighting. A war for control of our history, our land, and our future. And the blackfellas? They were victims of the same invasion, targeted by the same forces. Together, they were supposed to be erased, rewritten, replaced. And here's the part the elites fear the most. If we recognize that truth, if we see through the convict colony lie, the whole narrative they've built comes crashing down. Because then we realize that the people of this land Both Tartarian descendants and Aboriginal Australians share a common enemy and a common history, and that common history is one of freedom, advanced knowledge, and self-rule. That's why they work so hard to keep us divided. That's why the school system pushes the convict myth. That's why the media keeps us distracted with politics, sport, and celebrity gossip. They know that if we start connecting the dots, the bloodlines of the old Tartarians and the blackfellas will unite again, and the system they've built on lies will collapse overnight. We've been told we're a young nation. That's another lie. This land is ancient, and so is its true civilization. The only thing young about Australia is the British-made story that covers up what really happened. And if we want real freedom again, if we want the truth, we have to burn that fake story to the ground. Stop repeating their words. Stop celebrating their milestones. Start digging, literally and figuratively, for the real history that's buried under their lies. Because the truth is still here. It's in the architecture they haven't demolished yet. It's in the oral histories they couldn't quite erase. It's in the faces of the people they call descendants of convicts and Aboriginal Australians, the faces of survivors. Survivors of the greatest cover-up this land has ever seen. We were never convicts. We were never criminals. We were never the property of a king. We were Tartarians and blackfellas living in harmony, building, creating, thriving, until the day the Freemason-controlled empire came to destroy it all. And if you let go of the lies and start to see the truth, maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild it again.